15 minutes, and that was 5 minutes ago. So I think we have everybody that I know was expected. So why don't we start?
Okay.
I mean, Denise and Owen have a busy schedule, as do you and Kate. So
I'm almost set.
you're all set. All right, Herb, if you want to wait a couple minutes.
Yeah, it's up to you.
They like to punt it back to me, huh?
Mhm.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to get up to get a drink. So we'll pause as long as I need to go get a drink. How's that sound?
Okay.
Everybody go get a drink.
Mike, just lean back and grab some from the Merrimack behind you.
Oh, I'm going to go swimming. That's what it is. That's what it is. My friend has been taking some great pictures of Lawrence. I need to get them incorporated into the Zoom background pictures. I've got an awesome one of the Air Mill Clock Tower. And then another one he took, that wasn't of Lawrence, it was of Marblehead Harbor. I had to look at it first, the kaleidoscope of ice. And then in the center of it was this black spot. And I thought it was just a, break in that little piece of ice. It turns out to be a seal. And his drone is directly above it looking down. And it's like the coolest
Wow.
thing. And I had to look twice. And then I zoomed in on it. The seal's looking up at the drone like, hey, what are you doing? But and then I'll have to have him remove his, he's got his little tagline in there, Semper Fi or something, because he's a former Marine, But
Mhm.
I'll have to get that removed so I can use it as a backdrop. Or either way, we'll see how it goes. All right, I'll be right back.
Oh, and I got your comments. I haven't been ignoring you. I've been traveling since early yesterday morning, so.
Oh, it's fine. I talked to Dom about him a little bit yesterday.
Okay.
I'm back. The water was a little cold.
Mhm.
I'm recording this. How'd you guys fare with the ice storm?
Lost power like 6 hours.
Wow. We're fortunate up here. We didn't lose any power. I did lose the runway for 2 days, though. I was telling Irv that it's just, we worked so hard Friday night and Saturday morning going in early. And then the end result is we should have left early on Friday and slept in on Saturday because we had a 000 runway condition code. They had to close the runways. Thankfully, it all melted off by yesterday, though. Let me check on Mr. Collins.
Mike, do they force you to close the runway, or is it when it gets 000, it's not at pilot's discretion? Although they probably
Well,
won't
the
want to land on
departure
it.
was, we had a Pilatus take off on Sunday at pilot's discretion, but the gentleman at the other end of the phone said it is an unsafe condition. You have to close the runways.
Okay.
So now I wasn't going to challenge him on that.
I wasn't sure how that worked nowadays. Yeah.
Yeah, no, those are his words exactly. That's an unsafe condition. You have to close the runways. Yeah. What I thought,
I've landed on an icy runway. It's not fun. So
Cessnas and Cherokees could have taken off and landed. The Pilatus would have been fine. But at the end of the day,
you
what
start
happens
getting
when
jets,
Gulfstream
different
comes
story.
in? Yeah, and then so I felt bad for the FBOs, like Tim Campbell from Eagle East Aviation. He called me, he said, when are you going to open the runways? And I said, when the ice melts. I have no control over that. But
June.
yeah, so thankfully the sun came out and it melted. The fact that we plowed it so many times, I think, just left a small layer of residue underneath. So we'll see. Don't see Michelle or Barry, but thanks for Mastoff for showing up. Oh, and I sent you an email with the contact that I was provided. Seemed to be rather murky, not too much detail on that gentleman. So I'm wondering just how much the MassDOT highway involvement has been a delay on that project going under. I think Owen went for a drink too.
I'm here. I was looking for the email that you sent.
Oh, yeah, it wasn't, there was like, I think his name is this or that. It was a couple of years ago. So I'm like, well, obviously there's not too much involvement or interaction between the National Grid and Mass Highway. But I think it'll get them off their dime. You know, they'll stop moving on the project again.
Yeah, I'll look them up and see if I can find them in our directory and see what part of DOT they work for.
Okay, thanks.
Mike, when's your next commission meeting?
17th of February, which is next Thursday. It came fast.
And we plan on giving them an overview?
Would you like to?
Sure.
All right. That'll be good because that'll bring Mr. Castillo up to speed. And Mr. Foley will be able to brief everybody as well.
Take notes, Dan. I'll just sit and correct you if you're wrong.
Mike, I only see Lafayette Robinson,
Okay,
and I'll try to write them an email and see if they can give me a call.
awesome. Thanks, Owen.
Is it okay if I divulge your name and
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about, for those that may not be aware, is the power lines that run across the threshold of the approach end of Runway 32 on Osgood Street by the old Treadwell's ice cream stand. The National Grid was going to put those underground several years ago, and they just stopped. The process stopped, and I contacted their environmental consultant. They emailed me and sent us the notice for the Conservation Commission. They said, oh, it's on hold right now. So I received the communication from National Grid on another matter. So I brought up the fact that those poles were, you know, an obstruction. And it was just soon after we had one of our meetings regarding the obstructions around the airport. And I said, what's going on with the project to put the lines underground? And the gentleman from National Grid indicated that they were running into some opposition from Mass Highway. And Owen was kind enough to say, give me the contact name and I'll reach out and try to see what I can do to get it moving. So that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Mike, is it it's on 114, right?
Route 125.
125, that's right.
Yeah, 125 Osgood Street. That's the local road name.
Mike, tracking back to that email earlier today on the runway 32 approach.
Yep.
Were you aware that somebody had submitted the paperwork to request that?
Yeah, I think that's been in the works for years.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Years. Yeah.
I thought it was
Yeah.
ironic that came up at this point in time with the master plan.
No, that was submitted years ago. And there's
Okay.
always been a request. When are we going to get the approach? You know, so
Yeah. Okay.
I think, trying to remember, I think that may have been on or about the time the safety area was built. I think this
Okay.
was submitted, so it goes back that far.
Okay. All right.
So we talking 14, 15? I have to
Okay.
go back and listen my mind. It has been 25 minutes. No. 15 minutes since Mr. Collins called. Give him another couple minutes and then I don't want to keep everybody.
Okay.
There's only one chapter, I think. Irv, you probably would love to have some dinner tonight as well as Denise and Owen and Kate. Mr. Foley.
I'm down in Florida. I flew down yesterday and I'm in a hotel outside of Stewart, Florida. And I got here last night around 8 o'clock, and the local restaurant right in the hotel closed it right at 8. So they said, oh, it's a great place across the street and next door. So I went across the street. It's called something oyster bar. Well, I love oysters. So I sat down and ordered a beer, and I want a dozen raw oysters. She says, we're out of oysters. I go, you're an
Want a
oyster
beer
bar.
too?
She says, we're out of oysters. I said, all the oysters? She says, we don't have any oysters. I go,
The whole Gulf, no more oysters.
Guess you gotta
I
change
was
the name.
really, I really wanted some oysters. So I kind of ruined my whole night. Had to go to plan B, shrimp.
Oh,
How's the weather
that's
down
not a
there?
bad plan B.
That wasn't a plan B. Yeah, it wasn't a plan B.
Not a
How's
bad
the
plan B. I just muted Kate.
Did you mute me on purpose?
Yeah, we just kept hearing chatter. Weren't sure if you're talking to us or talking to somebody else.
I was trying to talk to you, but I don't.
Oh.
Did I not sound very good?
It was
Sounded
very,
like you were mumbling to somebody.
yeah, like you were talking behind you.
Oh, that's weird. I don't have my headset in. That's why. Sorry.
They always make fun of me when I do city department head meetings with this. But I think people can hear me loud and clear.
You sound fine. You got a good articulating voice.
I have a voice and a face for radio, I'm told, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe we should start. It's been 12 minutes. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Some people couldn't make it and called, indicating they had emergencies. Others said they were going to try, but they were busy. And others haven't contacted me. So I guess we can start. Irv,
Sounds
you have the
good.
floor.
Do I have control?
I will do that right now. I am surrendering control to Irvin. He is now the host.
Okay. Let me know when you see this. Do I have to do anything else besides share my screen? I'm not used to Zoom as usual.
I think it's just share your screen.
I gotta find share my screen. There we go.
Open up the file.
There you go.
wanna
I got
show.
it.
Yeah.
I got it.
And then share the screen.
There we go. How about now?
Perfect. And
Perfect.
keep an eye on the weight room because Bill Collins will be trying to get in.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, Dan, this is mostly for you because everybody else has seen it, although I've modified the presentation slightly since I gave it to the state and the FA last week. Again, the purpose of this is to go over the next phase or chapter of the master plan, and that's the alternatives analysis, where we take the facility requirements that we looked at the last time and then come up with different alternatives and options and how we could achieve them, and then make some decisions of whether or not they're worth moving forward with. As you'll see, some of them just are not. And again, just a refresher for you, this takes us way back to last year. We developed a design aircraft and the design code for the airport. We determined that for both runways, the design code was a B2, that establishes the standards for runway widths and the separations of runways and taxiways and so forth. And you can see the design aircraft that we came up with there, both Cessna citations. The facility requirements, we went through those, and some of the things that we decided that we needed to look at was one, runway 523 was wider than it had to be, given that design code, both the existing and forecast code, it should be 75 feet. Same with runway 1432, it should be 75 feet. We want to look at removing that displacement, that 80-foot displacement on runway 32. And develop an instrument approach procedure. I wasn't aware that one was already in the works, so that makes it easy. It's already in the works, and we know now from an email today that the FAA is working diligently towards getting that put in place. Look at the taxiways, removing taxiway Delta, extending taxiway Charlie across runway 523, connecting it up with taxiway Foxtrot. Looking at stub taxiways up at the far end of runway 32 near the north ramp, one connecting each of the taxiways, Foxtrot and Echo. We looked at some options for that, whether or not they were worth considering. We looked at runway taxiway alpha and realigning that to make it a true parallel taxiway. And talk about redesignating all the taxiways eventually consistent with current FAA standards. In other words, new lettering and numbering codes for them. And then lighting wise, we're looking at approach lights for runway 5 and 23, the different possible options and whether or not they were worth it. A PAC and a real system for runway 14. Over on the far right-hand side there, we're looking at the runway protection zones and how the airport can achieve control over them. Rebalancing the aprons. We know from our analysis that you have more apron space than you actually need today. That's mostly because the number of hangars have really increased considerably in the past 20 years. And there's a continued demand for hangars. So we looked at how we can convert some of that apron space into hangar space. And we looked for a solution to the non-airport vehicles crossing the two runways, mostly between the south and north ramps back and forth. And here I'm talking about the FBOs and the maintenance fueling trucks and things of that. The FAA wanted to look at the option of putting a perimeter road around the airport and how we could achieve that. So we looked at that. Again, the process for each of these, we developed a concept. We looked at the advantages and disadvantages of each one, the operational impact of each one. How would these affect the airport and aircraft operations? Would it meet federal standards, FAA design standards? Of course, we're not going to come up with anything that wouldn't. So we looked at the environmental impacts. We established a grading system that we've been using, and this actually turns out it impacts a couple of the projects to the point where they're just not worth moving forward with. Again, the NEPA requirements, whether or not an environmental assessment is required, or if it could be categorically excluded under NEPA, excuse me. We looked at the estimated cost of these projects, and then we made a recommendation to the airport and eventually to you, and then eventually to the airport commission of whether or not you should move forward with any of these projects, and if so, in what form. In some cases, we looked at multiple concepts. We also looked at a no-build concept. In other words, what do we do if you don't do anything and take no action? What are the consequences of that? And then we looked at taking corrective action for them. What we analyzed, we looked at, again, the runway.
Irv, if you don't mind, Commissioner Collins indicated that he's just waiting to be let in.
Okay. Oh, that little thing kept popping up and I kept moving it. Sorry about that. I was on a roll. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, are you there?
He's joining audio now, or
Okay.
he's in. Welcome, Bill.
Okay. Might still be muted.
He is muted. He looks,
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm in now. Sorry, I'm late.
That's okay. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Irv. Have a
Hi.
safe trip down there.
What's that?
Hope you're safe.
Yep, I'm down in Florida. I'm quite safe in my hotel room.
All right.
I know we were really just getting started. And I was just starting to go over the different concepts that we looked at as part of the alternatives analysis. And I was going to say runway 5, 2, 3. We looked at the length and the width of both the runways. We looked at displacing the runway 32, getting rid of the runway 32 displacement, and how we could do that and what the consequences would be. We looked at the taxiway configuration on the airport and the alignment. We looked at the airport lighting systems and what improvements could be made. We also looked at the runway protection zones on the 4 runway ends and what we could do to achieve full protection in those areas. We looked at hangars and aprons and how we could develop more hangars on the airport and where we could put them. And we also looked at the possibility of putting a perimeter road around the 2 runways so that the FBOs mostly would have a safer access around the airport rather than driving across the runway, because that has become a concern and noted by the FAA. And we also looked at developing and where we could put an SRE building, a new snow removal and maintenance equipment building. We looked at that. So real quick, runway 523. The length we know meets existing and future demand. And we also noted that trying to extend this runway would be almost an impossible environmental feat. But we believe for the aircraft that use this airport on a regular basis, that they're long enough. The width, again, is 100 feet for both runways, where the standard now is 75 feet. Okay, so we looked at what it would cost in terms of the environment to narrow the runways, and it's virtually no environmental impact. It does reduce the impervious surfaces of the runways. And to do this, it would be a category exclusion. You would have to go through an environmental assessment. But our recommendation was to do nothing for now, for a couple of reasons. One, you're just not going to narrow runway simply because the design code says you have to. The runway's fine as it is, and of course it was just reconstructed. So our recommendation is do nothing for now. Wait until the runway is due for another major overhaul reconstruction in 20 years or whatever the case may be. And then when that happens, before that happens, a couple of years out, you go in and take another look at the design standards and the aircraft that are using it, and things could possibly change in the next 20 years, and most likely will change. Essentially the same thing for runway 1432, although the runway condition is a little older, considerably older than runway 523. We recommend the same thing. Hold off, don't narrow it yet. Wait until it's due for reconstruction, okay? And then reassess its necessary width. I suspect of the 2 runways, this one will probably get narrowed to 75 feet the next time it's reconstructed, because most of the aircraft using it do not need a 100-foot wide runway. Runway 32 displacement. We know that displacement is caused by some existing obstructions. I got another slide. I'll show you where the obstructions are. And to mitigate the obstructions, we know that some easements are required, and that's a separate project. It's actually ongoing right now that DOM is involved in, okay? And most of the obstructions are non-vegetative though. There are telephone poles and there's some vents and things on top of this little commercial building right here. Well, you probably can't see yeah, right here. You're familiar with the airport as much as I am. There's some vents and things on top of that building, believe it or not, that are obstructions. The building itself is not. The odd thing about this runway though, even though you've got some obstructions there, you've also got some building in this area that probably shouldn't be there because they're in the runway protection zone. And I think the buildings classified such that the FAA would like to see them gone. I mean, they're not vacant warehouses or storage buildings. They're actually buildings where you have people inside and can congregate. So I think eventually the airport would probably have to look at acquiring those properties. And we'll get to that a little bit later on when I get to the runway protection zone discussion. I got another slide. It just shows some of the obstructions, existing obstructions. I'm not sure if you can see them. There's the red arrows right here. Markers are the telephone pole in here and something on top of this building. These pink markers and the yellow one are actual obstructions in terms of trees. Looking forward, if we do displace the threshold, you can see that the number of obstructions increases considerably, mostly on top of this building right here, but also these telephone poles here and on the other side of Osgood Street. And we were just actually talking about that before the meeting got started. Mike's aware of that, and so is the electrical company, and they're looking at options of how to get rid of those. And it's a separate background discussion that's been going on, but this is something we're looking at, and we think it's important that you get rid of this displacement, but it's also more important, I think, that you protect this runway protection zone and the people on the ground of the property. Again, we'll talk about that more when we get to that slide. So our recommendation here, just so you know, is to remove the displacement and try to get that runway threshold back to where it was. The pros of that is it helps the airport maintain its grant assurance compliance by doing everything possible to keep the airport as viable as possible. It does result in a slightly longer runway, although I don't think the 80 feet is that important. It will get rid of those obstructions in that approach surface, however. The cons are it's expensive and it's going to impact private businesses. There's no doubt about that. It'll require an environmental assessment if you're going to acquire the easements or obtain property, however. Okay. And the cost, we don't have a clear feel on the cost yet because of the number of easements and trees, but we'll get something put together by the time we get this master plan into the financial section. We'll have a better feel for that. So again, we do recommend that the airport move forward with this particular project.
Okay.
And again, we'll discuss the RPZ shortly. Taxiway configuration, taxiway Charlie. As you know, that's an ongoing project, and that's to extend Charlie across the runway and connect it up with Foxtrot. Taxiway Delta will go away as part of that project. Again, taxiway Foxtrot connects with Charlie. There will be a slight realignment down here to move taxiway Charlie over so it's the same setback as Foxtrot. We looked at two stub taxiways up in this area. One I have labeled as Foxtrot 1 and the other one is Echo 1. And the two designs called for putting these small stubs in to try to expedite one aircraft landing on 32. They can get off the runway a little bit faster and get back over to the south ramp. And we also looked at the possibility of aircraft landing on 32 and getting into the north ramp a little bit faster. But after talking to the tower chief and discussing this, we decided that Echo 1 was not a viable option. It just wasn't necessary. It didn't serve any real purposes. The runway is not that busy where aircraft couldn't continue down. So we think Foxtrot 1 is a viable option and we're recommending that. Taxiway Alpha, again, the initial concept was to get rid of this strange configuration and try to make it a true parallel. Okay. Last week when we looked at it, when we discussed it with the FAA and the state, this was the concept we were looking at. You can see the light yellow or tan, whatever you want to call it. That new alignment would include a run-up area here, another run-up area here, and it would reconnect with the other taxiways. You can see the fillet design and everything. After the meeting, we went back and Randy Christensen, our environmental specialist, he took another look at it, and his decision was, or his conclusion was, that because of the wetlands right in here, these swales, that the environmental impacts here would be so severe that trying to get this taxiway constructed would be pretty much an impossible feat. He thinks it would be too difficult to achieve, too expensive because of the environmental impacts. So after the meeting, we talked to Mike and we went back to the drawing boards and we decided to make that a no recommendation on that particular taxiway, to leave the existing configuration. What we will do, however, is redesign this portion of Alpha so that it meets the current standards, and that's 35 feet in width. So it would just get narrowed down from here, 35 feet, and then we would put in a run-up area in this area and then continue on. So this part would almost be the same, except you would now continue this way on the existing taxiway, but just a slightly narrower pavement. So that's our new recommendation. And again, that's one of the reasons we go through these different meetings, so we can all iron out our discussion and come up with different ideas and make sure we've covered all avenues and all approaches.
I like the idea of changing that run-up area. That would be a benefit, I think, to the residents that may or may not hear noise down in that new development.
Yeah, this one here.
This one over here, the other one.
Over here, yeah, yep, exactly. Yep.
So
Yeah,
I
with
think
this
these-
reconfiguration down here, you no longer have a run-up area in this area. So I think this was always a consideration once this taxiway got reconstructed. So,
Right.
and the other reasons we looked at on realigning the entire taxiway, we'd have to relocate the ILS and the AWAS and the PAPI. And again, this is just some of the pointers I had. So again, the concept originally was to realign. You see the cons. I think the positive benefits of it were good. Better pilot awareness. You know, pilots can get distracted very easy when they're taxiing, and when you have to start maneuvering around corners and making turns, it can get a little distracting, particularly at night. And again, we went back and took a look at the environmental impacts, and we decided that the wetland impacts were just too much. It would be a very challenging uphill battle to get that constructed. It would require an environmental assessment because of the wetlands. And we estimated the cost probably around 7.3, but that was before we got into all the discussions about the mitigation for the environmental parts of the, probably add a couple more $100,000 to that. So again, our recommendation was no, but to go ahead and narrow that eastern end, as I just talked to, 35 feet. Lighting, we looked at a number of things. First, the runway 14 PAPI and reel. As I pointed out to the group, while runway 14 is the least used runway, it's also a runway where the approach comes in over a dark area, it's over water. The pilot's looking at lights of the main part of the airport and overall Osgood Street. So we think that having a PAPI and reel system in there is definitely advantageous. Also, runway 14 is approved for circling procedures, so an aircraft could easily come in bad weather or at night and line up and make a maneuver low level and come in and line up on 14. So having the PAPI and reel out there would definitely be an advantage.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
a relatively inexpensive program. Okay.
That's great. Very
This-
good.
So environmental rating is quite low at 2, and it can be categorically excluded. And the cost for the PAPI and the reels are about $150,000, maybe $200,000 combined. Most likely could get done the next time runway 1432 goes through the reconstruction process. And again, a recommendation on this is yes. We also looked at approach lighting systems. Now there's a number of different systems out there, but we did look at 3 that would fit Lawrence because of the nature of its types of operations, a non-commercial airport. And the 3 are a medium intensity approach lighting system, or MALS. This is a pretty simple system, and I'll show you some examples of each one. Second one is a medium intensity approach lights with sequence flasher, or a MALSIF. And then the third one is a MALSAR. It has a runway alignment indicator lights. The sequencing flashes and runway alignment indicator lights. The MALS over here, 7 light stations. You can see the light stations are all white lights. They're about 200 feet apart. They can be adjusted. The spacing can be adjusted because of obstacles. It's like it's a road or something in the way. It's 1,400 feet from the threshold of the runway to the last set of lights. You do have some land requirements for them for not only to construct the towers, but also to make sure that the light plane is clear of obstructions. The drawback to a MALS is you don't get any visibility credit. Some approach lighting systems will give you a slight visibility credit on your instrument procedures, where the FAA can lower the approach procedure minimum by 1/4 of a mile. The MALS does not offer that option. Second one we looked at is a MALS-F. It's the same thing, has the 7 light stations. It extends 1,400 feet from the threshold, but also has 3 flashing lights on the last 3 light stations, or the first 3 as you're approaching them. So it gives the pilot a little better indicator, a little better alignment indicator, particularly at night in inclement weather. Again, extends 1,400 feet. You have the same basic land requirements. And again, no visibility credit, however, for this particular system. The third system we looked at is a MALSAR. Has 12 light stations. Has the 7 steady burning light stations, just like the MALS has right here, extending out to 1,400 feet. Then it has 5 additional sequencing flashers that extend another 1,000 feet. So all told, it's 2,400 feet from the runway threshold. Land requirements are a little more stricter. You have to have land for both the mouths, but you also have some land for these last 5 towers. Possible quarter-mile visibility credit. We're not sure if you would get it at Lawrence. We would have to contact the FAA, have them make that determination, but there's a good chance you would get that quarter-mile credit with a full MALSAR system. And again, here's the layout. This is runway 5. The MALS portion you can see would come down the hill and extend out across, I think this is Charles Street, across Charles Street, right to this point right here. So you can see the approximate locations of towers. Only 2 of them are on airport property and the remaining 5 are off airport property. So you'd have to get easements to put these in these particular locations. These are the additional flasher lights that go with the MALSAR system, which we do not recommend on this particular runway. Again, because they would go, and we looked at this, they're going to go on private property, and then the flashing lights we think would be a real distraction. The other drawback to an approach lighting system on runway 5, I don't have to tell you this, is the towers are going to be pretty tall. You're talking 100+ feet on each of these towers, with the exception of the first one because of the terrain. So you're going to have these very tall towers out there, which I think would be problematic for a lot of people out there. So again, the flashing lights would go away. After we looked at this, again, we considered all the systems there. We looked at, the pros: increased flight safety. And again, if you put the MALSAR in, you could get possible better credit for your visibility for the ILS approach to runway 5. The cons are the land requirements. And again, the approach minimums, you would get the credit there if you put the MALSAR in. We think the public annoyance would be extremely high out there, considering you got all the property you have to acquire to put the towers in. And then the tower height is another consideration. So initially we had recommended the MALS system, but Mike and I talked about this actually today, the last time we talked about it. And we decided, because the FAA probably would not fund this particular system, a MALS system on this runway end, Mike decided he wanted to no-go it. So we're recommending that it's a no, not to go forward with this particular project. We also think that the cost here of $1.2 million was a low estimate, so it would probably be about twice that amount. An environmental assessment would be required, and a lot of land would have to be acquired. So we recommend no on this particular runway end. Runway 23 is a little bit different story. We're recommending a MALSAR over there. Again, we looked at all 3 systems. The MALSAR makes the most sense, mostly because you do have most of the land. Okay. The drawbacks are that some of it's in wetlands, so we'd have to go through an environmental assessment because of the towers going in the wetlands. And we'd have to look at how to properly space the light towers over here, where the intersection of Osgood and Holt Road. No matter how we space those, one of the light towers would have to go somewhere in that intersection. So most likely you could align them so that we go in an island some sort right there. I think there's already a little island there, but I'm not mistaken. But that's one of the drawbacks, that you'd have to do that. Again, we considered all 3 systems and recommended the MALSAR system. Again, the airport owns most of the land, certainly increased flight safety. And we believe you could easily get a quarter-mile approach visibility credit for that. Again, the cons are the land requirements for the last 2 towers and the tower locations. Okay. It will, Randy believes it's environmental rating of 4, which means that we're going to have to go through an environmental assessment. Okay. And again, we're looking at the cost of that. And again, we reassessed these costs the last couple of days, and we think the price is going to be about twice that amount. People don't build a lot of approach lighting systems, so it's hard to try to come up with a definitive cost at a planning level study like this. But we'll see if we can't come up with a better cost estimate. Although we think this particular project is going to be in the long term. Is that correct, Mike? We did talk about that, the long term on this one.
That is correct, Herb.
Okay, so long after I've retired and Mike's retired, probably. But that is a recommendation. We do recommend it. And again, for Bill and Dan, these recommendations, if the commission, if you guys recommend it to the commission and the commission moves forward with them and recommends them, it means simply that they're going to put on the airport layout plan. Whether they actually ever happen is a different story, but that's the first start. We study them and then we'll put them on the airport layout plan, and then we'll see how they fall out over the years in terms of priority and funding. But we believe that this could be an FA funded project if you can get this visibility credit in here.
Which would be 80%, Irv?
90%
Thank you.
plus 5% from the state if they go along with it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Probably the more controversial thing we're looking at the airport in this particular master plan are the runway protection zones. And I probably should do a little better job presenting this to you, just in case, just to remind you what a runway protection zone is. It's a trapezoid shaped piece of land off the end of a runway. It doesn't have any elevation to it. It's a flat surface. In other words, they're not trying to protect the airspace above it, but it's designed to protect people and property on the ground so that there's no activity in that particular area where in the event, unlikely but unfortunate event of an accident or an aircraft crashing in the runway protection zone, that you minimize the risk to people and property on the ground. It's not there to protect the airplanes and the occupants of the airplanes, just there to protect the people and the property on the ground. So obviously you don't want to have activity in a runway protection zone where you have a congregation of people, churches, residential areas, shopping centers, things of this nature. Things that can be in there are usually not a problem. Parking lots, warehouses, storage buildings where you have a very low concentration of people, those are permitted. And again, this is not something that the FAA is going to force you to do. They're not something they're going to make you do. This is something that each airport should work towards, is trying to make the facility as safe as possible, not only for the flying public, but also for the people that live around the airport. We looked at all 4 runway ends. We know that runway 14 is not an issue. There's nothing out there. Nothing's ever going to get developed out there, most likely, because of the hill and the slope of the terrain. And also you have the Merrimack River. So there's not an issue out there. Runway 5 and 3-2 are partially under airport control. They are problematic in terms that there is activity going on in those 2 runway protection zones that need to be looked at and studied. Runway 5 and 32. Well, one of the problems I have, there we go. Let me go back. Yeah, I skipped runway 23. Runway 20, oh, there, runway 23 is under full control at like 14. So runway 5 and 2-3, again, not under full airport control. So there's the runway 32 RPZ on the right-hand side. We've already looked at this once before. That's the runway protection zone where we're trying to control activity. And you have 2 particular activities going on there that can be a concern. One is the little strip mall here, this building itself. And then of course you have the ice cream stand down here where you can get a large concentration. I'm sure people, particularly in the summertime. So those are 2 areas that we'd have to look at a little bit closer. Runway 5 is a little bit different story. I don't have to tell you that. You've got a mix of commercial properties along Charles Street here, and then going out on Sutton. This is Sutton, right? Sutton. Then you get into a large congregation of private property and residentials and homes and stuff of this nature. So the recommendation is to move forward with, note this in the master plan, note it on the airport layout plan, make the public aware of it, okay? And then slowly, as property becomes available, the airport starts acquiring properties that meet the definition of they shouldn't be there, okay? And again, I don't know the makeup of all these buildings in here. It's certainly something we could look at a little bit closer, and we will look at it a bit closer. I'm not sure if they're buildings full of people or just mostly warehouses and stuff of this nature. But in the master plan, we're going to define each of these parcels, and we'll go into a little more in depth in what each one is and what are the occupancies and what are the recommendations, whether or not the airport should look forward to acquiring that property or not acquiring it, okay? Obviously, if the property is acquired, then the buildings would no longer be available for their current use and would be turned into something else. Could be resold and reused for something else. Again, the public awareness is the biggest thing to make sure the public's aware of the issue. I know this is going to be controversial. You're probably going to get some feedback once word gets out that you're looking at acquiring all this property. And it's not, again, it's not something the airport has to do overnight. It's not something that's a top priority. It's not a safety issue. It's just something you should work out. And I think as Mike or somebody said in our meeting last week, if it takes 99 years, it takes 99 years. It's just a slow process that you go through. Okay. Hangers and aprons, again, we know that there's an imbalance. You have a lot more apron space than you need. And also a hanger shortfall. We know that you have an existing waiting list for hangers. Our forecasts indicate that you need about 57 more hanger spots or slots in the next 20 years. So we looked at a number of different ways where you can develop hangers. Katie Hogan, I actually went down and sat with Mike, and we looked at this and came up with some ideas. Again, this is your south ramp. We looked at, we could get a possible 24 new slots in there, mostly through development of 3 large T hangers right in this area right here. Okay. That's a couple 8-bay and 1 6-bay T hanger that could go in this area. We also looked at, we know that the owner of hangar 45 and 37 is looking at repurposing that area and building a box hangar. So that would actually decrease the number of hanger slots slightly, depending on what the reuse of this is. So I'm just calling that basically a no net gain on that particular building. Just be a different shape, a large box instead of 2 smaller hangars. Right in that area. And then the north ramp is where obviously we can get some more hangars in. We looked at 2 particular areas. We looked at right in this area was ideal spot to put some clear span hangars in, not T hangars, but some clear span with just, entry through the front of them. We think you can get about 8 in there, possibly 9, depending on how tight we can squeeze them in. You can go over this building restriction line a little bit, but not by much. That's a 20-foot building restriction line. So anything right there has to be 20 feet or lower, but you can get at least 8 in there, we feel. We also looked at, we can add some T hangers up in this area. We actually got a lot of land to work with up in here. A lot of this is uplands and up behind it. So we can actually get a couple large T hangers in there. And again, T hangers are your best option if you're looking at maximizing the number of spaces on the airport. If you start putting conventional type hangers in there, the revenue is probably good, but you're not going to have as many available slots. There's a couple things we have to look at in here. We know we have to realign these slightly, push them back a little bit so that we can get a separate taxi lane in and out and not a clear shot right to the runway. So we got to have some kind of dividing line there. So we're looking at moving those back ever so slightly on the master plan on the ALP. The other thing is, and Owen's going to look at it. I don't think he's looking at it, but he brought up the fact that the state does have a statute about the height of buildings and stuff like that. So we have to look at that and whether or not we would be violating any state statutes on that. But again, I think we could easily get those in, even if we have to slide them back a little bit further to keep them well clear of any airspace issues and make sure we get enough of the apron, a ramp area in here so that the aircraft can taxi clearly to and from the runway without having direct access. Okay, the next one we looked at was the runway vehicle crossing concern. And this came about as a runway safety action team, the RSAT, a tower chief, and I think Mike's involved in it in the FAA, and brought up the fact that there is a concern with the number of vehicle crossings. Now, I don't have to tell anybody just in the airport, a lot of vehicles going back and forth from the south ramp to north ramp. So we looked at some different options. We identified 4 possible options. One was to do nothing. Okay. The other one was to use public roads. We know do nothing is not an option. Okay, we got to do something. The other one is to force these vehicles to start using public roads. Okay. We also looked at developing a perimeter road around way 32 and 5. And we looked at a tunnel, combination tunnel and perimeter road. We know the perimeter road is difficult without relocating a runway 32 threshold. You'd have to go around runway 32 and around runway 23. We can't go the other way. There just isn't sufficient land around that way. So you'd have to go to the east around, towards Osgood Road and bring it around. So we'd have to relocate the runway 32 threshold. That's not an option. We just don't want to do that because you can't have the vehicles going through the safety area, and the safety area goes right up to the edge of airport property. Plus, you have a problem with Part 77. There has to be a certain clearance above a private road on the approach threshold. So that would be an impact. We also know that coming around runway 32, we'd have to go well clear of taxiway alpha, which means running a road along the slope there through the wetlands. And again, the same thing around runway 23. You don't have to run into wetlands, or you start moving thresholds. We decided that the impact just wasn't worth it. Okay, it was a high environmental impact because of the wetlands, and it would require an environmental assessment. We estimate just the perimeter road alone, most of the costs are dealing with the environmental issues, about $3.2 million. So we recommend a no to that. We also looked at a road with a tunnel. And I'm going to move on to the next slide real quick. There's the two options we looked at, okay? The purple is option 1, perimeter road only. And we tried to bring it around here and get it as tight behind this hangar and up and along. We had to stay outside the taxiway object-free area. Okay, and around runway 5 again. So very, very complicated. The other option back when we were first looking at that was to take the existing taxiway alpha, which is right in here, and put a tunnel underneath runway 32. Okay. Excuse me. We did look at, on our early drawing boards, we did look at running a tunnel from here all the way underneath. But we decided we didn't even go too much further into that beyond the discussion in the conference room one day, because we just know that the cost would be so high. I think talking about it expended all the energy we were going to do on that particular option. The tunnel here I thought was worth it, but then we looked at the cost. Cost was going to be over $16 million to do that, even a cut and bury type tunnel. Plus, we know now that we're not going to relocate alpha, so that just blew that whole idea right out of the water. So our recommendation on this is to do nothing, not do nothing. The recommendation is that the vehicles must use the public roads. They're just going to have to bite the bullet and drive out on Osgood and Uphold and come into the north ramp that way. I think in the end, it's going to take them a little bit longer to get to and from, and they're probably not going to like it. But I know Mike's a big boy. I'll put his big boy pants on and tell him that's the way it's going to be. So, but that's our recommendation. No perimeter road and no tunnel. Forgot I had all these pop outs. So the recommendation again is use public roads. One of the last things we looked at was the maintenance and SRE building. We know that the maintenance existing building is 40 plus years, but it does have a brand new roof. That's not the new roof. That's the old roof covered with some snow. We did look at the possibility of putting a building up on the slope by runway 32 and taxiway Charlie to the east of the control tower, but it would have to be on a slope. It would probably have to be a 2-level building because of that slope. There's concerns about tower siting over top of it. The cost, we think we revised the cost estimate somewhere around $4 million. And originally the concept was that you do that and then you get rid of this building and then you can repurpose this particular land for a hangar in here, hangars in there. But that just continued to raise more and more concern. So after talking to this with Mike back and forth on this, the recommendation is to just leave this building where it's at, continue to service it and maintain it as best you can, and possibly someday you'd wind up replacing it. So excuse me. So the summary was runway width, leave both runways as is for now and reassess the required width when each runway is due for reconstruction. Again, runway 32 at 1432 will come up a little bit sooner. The recommendation is for runway 32 to just get rid of that runway displacement. Okay. Initially, that can be done through easements and tree clearing and removing those poles. Taxiway alpha realignment, leave the taxiway as is. Don't change anything other than narrow the eastern end of it down to 35 feet and put that run-up area in. Runway protection zones, note it in the master plan and on the airport layout plan that X number of properties should be acquired as time and money permits. And again, we're going to assess those properties and we'll make sure it's in the master plan. Excuse me. Hangars and aprons, repurpose as we talked about some of the apron space, redesignate some of the hangar apron spaces, future hangars. Know the perimeter road, just leave it as it is. Force the vehicles to start using public roads. And you can start doing that whenever you want. You want to wait till the master plan is signed, sealed, and delivered, that's fine. That's up to Mike to decide when you want to do that. And again, just continue to maintain your maintenance and SRE building the best you can and do not build a new facility at this particular time. And that is the slightly revised airport layout plan. I had actually had Katie working on it yesterday and today. We did not get the narrowing the taxiway alpha in there in time. So we'll take care of that. But again, you can see it shows the new taxiway configuration, Charlie coming across. This would become Charlie 2, I think, eventually. Okay. Delta, the green area goes away. And it shows the new hangars. And again, we'll refine this as we get further into the study in the next few weeks. It also shows the location of the new terminal building right in here. Okay. It does show where we were looking. It does show a hangar in here. I have to think about that, what we want to actually show in that area. I can talk to Mike about that. So that is pretty much it in a nutshell. Here's our schedule. It's pretty aggressive from this point forward. We're under the gun to get this airport layout plan wrapped up and signed by in time for the FAA to issue grants for the upcoming environmental assessment. We actually have until probably June or July before they start issuing grants, but my goal is to get everything wrapped up by the 31st. The next big steps we have to do is for the commission and Mike to sit down with me and decide what projects you want to move forward with on the airport layout plan. Okay, that will set the stage for us to wrap everything up. We can get that on the plan, and I can start getting the rest of the report wrapped up. The financial chapter is the next big one coming up. I won't go through this whole list here, but pretty aggressive schedule. We do have a public information meeting slated for February 22nd. We're supposed to have 2 more meetings, so public information meetings. So we have one slated for February 22nd. We're going to do it virtually, using a program called Teams Live or Teams Online. I forget how it is. The participants will be given. We'll publish it. Mike's going to publish it once I get him the information. Publish it in the paper, I guess, on the airport website, and all the participants have to do is go to that particular link. They don't have to have anything special on their computers, just an internet browser, and then we'll go through. It'll be a live presentation, and the public can ask questions by typing their questions into a message box, and then we'll answer their questions. But we got that slated for the 22nd, I think at 7 p.m., and we will schedule another one sometime in mid to late March, once we get this thing wrapped up, to walk the public through it, just to make sure that there's no last minute concerns and stuff like that. So I don't want to feel like public to feel like we're shoving this down their throat, because we don't want to do that. But that's the basic schedule to get this wrapped up. And I will participate in the 17th, February 17th commission meeting. And you can just give them an overview, or you guys can, and I can answer any question. Mike can let me know what you want me to do. So Dan or Bill, you have any questions?
No, as usual, very thorough, very well laid out and transparent. I mean, a lot of details you don't ordinarily think of go into the plan.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny because you change one little thing and it can have a domino effect. So that we have to think through all this stuff very carefully. Like the perimeter road, it's a nice idea, but now you got to start shifting runways and
Just not
things like
cost
that.
effective. I mean,
Not cost
you know,
effective,
it looks like
exactly.
we're in pretty good shape. Actually, a runway being wider is for safety
Yeah, you
reasons
are.
better.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
you are. Yep. Exactly. Yeah,
Thank you.
exactly. Dan, are you okay? Any questions, sir?
The only, the only observation that I have is that I'm just, where you mentioned that the runways were wider than they're supposed to be, and that the eventual plans are going to be to narrow them. And I know that that's not going to happen immediately, and I don't expect it to happen immediately. But I'm wondering that if and when the time comes when you have to do something with the runways, if you not only narrowed them, but slightly moved them towards the middle of the airport, but still pointing in the right direction, if that wouldn't free up some space for that perimeter road. Does that make it sense?
Yep, that makes sense. Runway 523 would be a challenge because you can't go much further to the northwest.
Right.
Otherwise, you'd have to extend that runway safety area even further. And same thing with 1432. You're going to start getting into land owned by North Andover. So I think that would be the only challenge there. But it's certainly worth looking at. And when you get to that particular point, when you're particularly 1432, when it comes time to reconstruct it, it would be nice to have a perimeter road.
Yeah,
But
I know that's a wish list.
Yeah, it was. And it was a little more complicated than I thought. Once we started sketching it out, it became more and more complicated.
Yeah.
Maybe the FBOs will pay for a tunnel.
Yeah, I wouldn't count on it.
No. We can put it on there and we'll just say private funding, whatever private funding's available.
Sure, right. The 12th of never.
The 12th of never, yeah. That's a good idea, Dan. I think that's certainly something worth keeping in mind.
At the very least, if we call their attention to this, the fact that the runway incursions are a major issue and they came out in the plan, they might prioritize their trips. And because it's usually the FBOs we're talking about that need the runway crossing, right?
It's my understanding that it's them exclusively.
Yeah. I think if we tell them the option where they're going to have to, use the private road, hopefully they'll work with us. I mean, that's my thought anyways. And they can cut down and prioritize their trips and combine a couple of trips. If it's feasible, at least we can start at that level, I guess. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Bill. I think that's a great way of approaching it. And when they realize that they have to go, and we're fortunate to have a road that does go around the airport. Ostensibly, it is a perimeter road just outside the fence line.
Right.
And I think they will have to prioritize. I think that's, and it's the FBOs darting back and forth to customers' hangars on the north side, or escorting somebody over there because it's more convenient than driving around. Something like that. It's unnecessary. and we don't need to have it that way. And I think this will cause people to really prioritize the amount of trips they take, because now they have to go a little bit longer, not that much in
Right.
terms of distance, but I
Yeah.
do agree with you. I think they'll look at it twice, like, do I really need to go, or can I combine my trips? So it's, at the end of the day, I like it being discussed in the master plan because it's something that's been talked about and been brought up with the FBOs, but old habits die hard. So now this is something that is documented, and it is something that I can point to and say, after thorough study and analysis, it was determined that this is the best practice to follow it. You know, so it gives me some leverage in terms of it's not just Mike Miller saying, I don't want you to drive across the runway. It's now, this is a master plan study to determine this unnecessary crossings, use the public road.
Yeah.
Well, it becomes a safety issue.
Absolutely, Dan. That's really the big part of it. It's a safety issue.
Yeah.
That's how you present.
It's also too, your employees go through across a lot, but they're trained and they do it, and I think they're better. But the FBOs, I can see where they get a lot of turnover and they get new employees and they're trained, but
And
I don't think you
actually,
have the same level of awareness and safety there.
it's exactly, and I had a conversation with the safety inspector, John Merck from the FAA, who's also an engineer, and he said to me, he is not opposed in any way, shape, or form of airport operations crossing the field, because we have the set of eyes to know what to look for, not just how to operate on the field, but also to look for deficiencies that need to be corrected. He said, the FBOs aren't looking for that. You know, he said, you guys crossing the field may see a light that's out or a sign that's not working or some FOD that's in the infield. He said, you guys are okay. It's the unnecessary traffic from the FBOs that really aren't looking out for those issues on the airfield. So he actually encouraged us to continue to do it, but he wants us to discourage other people from engaging in that behavior.
Well, we ought to put it on the agenda and, just address it as soon as possible.
Sure. Thank you, Dan.
Good idea. I'm gonna have to leave you, unfortunately. I have another meeting here. And,
All right.
Well, thank you, Dan. And we're wrapped up unless there's any more questions, or if the state has any comments, Owen or Denise.
I'm good. Nice job, Irv.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you, Denise. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Yes, have a nice evening.
You too.
Anything
Thanks so
you-
much.
Good job.
Owen, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
Mike, I sent that
everyone. Good
email.
night.
Okay, good night.
Good night.
take care.
All right, Bill,
All
thank
right,
you for
Dan,
joining.
thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I
Thanks.
was late and really
Oh, that's
enjoyed the
okay.
presentation.
Oh, you're welcome. Gave us a chance to chat about meaningless stuff.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks.
All right, we're all set then?
We are, Dan. Thank you.
Right, good night.
Good night, sir.
Motion to adjourn, I guess.
Now we get out of here.